A once penniless cowhand accepts a marriage proposal from a wealthy widow, only to discover she's hiding a secret larger than any fortune. The arrangement was meant to protect her from meddling family members who wanted to lock her away, but soon hidden documents and unexpected medical revelations pushed their alliance to the breaking point. Will he stand by her through each staggering twist, or walk away from the greatest opportunity and biggest responsibility he's ever faced? To see how everything resolves and what surprise revelations still lie ahead, listen to the full story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to support our storytelling and ensure you never miss another dramatic tale. Your support helps us continue sharing remarkable journeys of love, resilience, and second chances. Jasper Montgomery trudged through the windswept Wyoming streets with his head bowed low, the frigid gusts slicing through his threadbare coat. At 39, life had worn him down into someone few would recognize from his prime. Years earlier, he'd arrived in Windbreak County dreaming of one day owning a modest ranch, only to watch every hope crumble when a string of droughts and financial crises swept across the region. This particular winter had proven especially unkind, leaving him penniless, hungry, and nursing the sting of old injuries visible in the stiff way he carried himself. On this biting morning, Jasper's sole mission was to scrape together enough coins for a hot meal at the local diner, a place he frequented only because the waitress, Flora, sometimes snuck him leftovers. Crossing the threshold from the bitter cold into the diner's relative warmth felt like stepping into another world. The bell above the door jingled, and he removed his battered hat out of habit. A swirl of coffee and frying bacon teased his senses, reminding him just how desperate he had become. "Morning, Jasper," Flora greeted, recognizing the haunted look of exhaustion around his eyes. She filled a mug with fresh coffee, setting it before him with a covert nod. He sighed, nodding thanks. Over the past few months, his savings had trickled to nothing, forcing him to sell off his last possessions: saddlebags, bridles, even his father's old revolver. Dignity might have been next had it been worth anything in the bank. As he sipped the steaming coffee, voices from a nearby booth drifted his way. Two ranchers discussing the newest wave of foreclosures. "Hurdle and Finch Bank isn't cutting anyone slack," one man said with a bitter edge. "That widow who married old Howell years ago? She's in charge now, and rumor says she's tightening the screws on every overdue note." The other man shook his head. "Madeline Howell's a strange one, not seen much in town since old Abel Howell passed. Some say she's losing her sight. Others claim she's cunning as ever." Jasper tried to shut out the talk, focusing on the coffee that was quickly cooling. Life in Windbreak County held fewer options than ever, and the mention of Abel Howell's widow only reminded him how fortunes could shift overnight. Some folks soared into wealth by inheritance or cunning. Others, like Jasper, found themselves on the verge of sleeping in horse stalls if luck didn't turn. Moments later, Flora eased a plate of eggs onto his table. "Day old," she murmured, going to waste otherwise. Though gratitude and shame tangled in his throat, he thanked her, forcing each forkful down slowly. He'd survive another day, at least. His plan, however modest, was to keep asking for ranch work, maybe fix fences or tend to neglected livestock. But it was increasingly clear no one was hiring in the dead of winter. Pulling his coat tight, Jasper stepped back outside. Snow drifted against the boardwalk, and the biting gusts nearly stole his breath. In the distance, the imposing shape of Hurdle and Finch Bank rose on the main street like a fortress of power. Abel Howell had once owned that institution, and rumor said his widow, Madeline Howell, had expanded its reach beyond the county. The name flickered again in Jasper's mind, just as a voice behind him caught his attention. "Montgomery, Jasper Montgomery." He spun to see Sheriff Bourne crossing the icy street with purposeful strides. As far as Jasper knew, he'd broken no law unless being broken Wyoming was now illegal. "Sheriff," Jasper asked, tipping his hat in greeting. Bourne peered at him, mustache rimmed with frost. "Might have a lead for you, unconventional, but it's paying." Jasper could scarcely hide the flicker of hope. "Heard you've been searching for stable work or ranch chores?" "Well, Ms. Howell at the Howell estate needs someone. She's older, has trouble seeing these days, and rumors say she's looking for a live-in assistant." "Could be your shot." Those words lit a spark in Jasper's chest. The Howell estate was legendary for its grandeur, perched on a bluff overlooking miles of rolling hills. Assisting with what exactly, he asked, forcing down his skepticism. "Caretaking chores, maybe reading documents. She's losing her eyesight, and her usual employee left to tend a family emergency. Pay's said to be decent, includes lodging. Better than freezing in that barn you've been renting." Jasper swallowed the last of his pride. "Where do I sign?" Bourne gave him a slip of paper with an address. Be there tomorrow morning and she's expecting someone promptly at 9. Don't be late with that. The sheriff tipped his own hat and headed off, leaving Jasper alone in the swirling snow, clutching the piece of paper like a life raft. He only learned later that this simple, desperate job offer was the first domino in a line of events that would change his life because Madeline Howell, the 72-year-old widow rumored to be half-blind, had plans for her new caretaker that went far beyond cooking or reading her mail. The Howell estate sat well outside the small town, a winding road leading up a slope where even in winter's icy grasp, sprawling acres hinted at former splendor. By the time Jasper arrived, having hitched a ride on a passing hay wagon for part of the journey, his cheeks burned from cold wind and his heart hammered with apprehension. In the distance, the imposing silhouette of the mansion dominated the horizon. Even half buried in snow, it exuded a quiet old-world authority. He shuffled onto the porch, noticing the meticulous woodwork on the doors and the tastefully carved H&F crest from Abel Howell's days, taking a breath. He rapped the brass knocker and tried to quell the nervous tremor in his stomach. A sharply dressed housekeeper opened the door. Judging by the pinch in her expression, she'd already decided Jasper wasn't up to standard. Yes, Jasper Montgomery, he managed, removing his battered hat. Sheriff Bourne said, Miss Howell needed a caretaker. She cast him a dubious once-over, then stepped aside. Come in. Wipe your boots, please. Mrs. Howell is in the solarium, grateful for the warmth enveloping him. Jasper stepped onto a polished marble floor that glimmered under chandeliers. The house spoke of a wealth once poured into every corner, antique furniture, tapestries, and intricate moldings along the high ceilings. It felt alien to his dusty existence. The housekeeper led him through corridors until they reached a glass-walled room overlooking snow-blanketed gardens. There, seated in a plush chair, was Madeline Howell. She wore her age with surprising regality, silver hair in a neat twist, a face set with fine lines that seemed earned through decades of challenges. Even from the doorway, Jasper sensed her gaze flicking in his general direction, though it didn't quite meet his eyes. Miss Howell, the housekeeper, announced. Mr. Montgomery is here, then. With a disapproving glance, she withdrew, leaving him alone with the widow. Mr. Montgomery, she said, her voice soft but tinged with Boston-honed elegance. Please sit. He obeyed, settling into a chair across from her. Thank you, ma'am, for considering me. She nodded, her silver hair catching sunlight through the solarium's glass. You've been recommended by the sheriff as a diligent sort, though. Life's dealt you a heavy hand lately. Jasper shifted, bracing for judgment, but her tone held only frankness. I lost my last steady job when the ranch changed ownership, he explained, summoning any scrap of dignity he had left. I've done bits of everything. Mending fences, caring for horses, fixing odds and ends. I can read and write. Decently, too. She listened in silence, hands folded in her lap. Then she reached for the silver-rimmed teacup beside her fingers, feeling for it with a certain caution that betrayed her compromised vision. As you may know, I'm no longer able to see details. Doctor calls it progressive macular degeneration. Light and dark shapes, some color. Yes, but reading small print or writing checks is out of the question. I'm sorry, ma'am, Jasper said softly, a corner of her mouth curved, though not quite a smile. Sympathy's appreciated but not required. I need practical help. For Montgomery, tasks around the estate. Yes, but also someone to read my correspondence. Manage basic finances, handle official errands in town. It's not merely a farmhand position. It's more akin to a personal aide. Jasper nodded, mind churning. I'm willing to learn whatever it takes. I know finances in a broad sense, just not on a bank-level scale. You'll manage, she said. In exchange, I offer a small cottage on the property, regular wages, and an opportunity for honest work. Relief swept over him. Months of anxiety threatened to crumble as he saw the first real hope of stability. That's more than generous, Madeline. Howell tilted her head, gaze still failing to meet his eyes directly. Generosity has nothing to do with it. I get what I need, a competent pair of hands and eyes. You get a roof and coin in your pocket. Strictly business, Mr. Montgomery. His face warmed, uncertain if it was gratitude or the strangeness of having a refined older widow speaking so bluntly. Yes, ma'am. I'm grateful. I'll do my best. She set the teacup down with careful precision. I'm sure you will. But be warned, this arrangement comes with conditions. Not everything here is straightforward. Circumstances force me to consider new strategies. He swallowed strategies without missing a beat. She continued, I realize this is abrupt, stir Montgomery, but I also require a more permanent bond than mere employer-employee. My nephew Damien Howell is determined to meddle in my affairs. I have no desire to move out of my own home into some comfortable facility. So I need the perfect shield, someone with a legitimate claim that keeps Damien at arm's length. Uncomprehending, Jasper stared at her. I'm not sure I follow, ma'am. Madeline inhaled slowly. Let me be direct. I need a husband in name at least. A marriage of convenience that secures my autonomy and provides you with financial security. The notion was so outlandish that Jasper almost doubted her sincerity, but her lined face held resolve. Not just marry you, he echoed. Precisely, she replied calmly. At 72. Romance is the least of my concerns. This is about legal standing. It is about you gaining legitimate shelter and me retaining the freedom to decide how I live out my days. With those words, Jasper's precarious world tilted. Marriage to a wealthy widow he'd just met beyond bizarre. Yet deep down, he felt a stirring of possibilities. This might be the strangest offer he'd ever receive. But in the harsh reality of his circumstances, it could also be salvation. That first day, Madeline sent him away with a short phrase that echoed in his mind long after take 3 days to decide. She insisted he move into the caretaker's cottage immediately to begin the more mundane duties while he weighed her proposition. If he declined, no ill will would be held, he would remain her hired aide. But if he agreed, their relationship would change drastically, and so would his entire future. Settling into the caretaker's cottage felt almost surreal. After weeks huddling in barns or shabby rooms above stables, having 4 walls of polished wood and a heater that worked was luxury incarnate. The small space included a proper bed, an ensuite bath, and a modest living area that overlooked the estate's eastern pasture. He spent his first night staring at the ceiling, mind churning through the widow's bizarre proposal. Marrying Madeline Howell meant stepping into a role he'd never asked for. She was thrice his age, albeit with a regal bearing that commanded respect. More alarming was how it forced him into the Howell family's crosshairs, especially nephew Damien, a man rumored to have unscrupulous tendencies. Yet could Jasper truly ignore the stability and opportunity this arrangement promised? He'd be paid well, have permanent shelter, maybe even some claim to the estate if Madeline willed it, so it was an enormous leap from the brink of homelessness. Over the next 2 days, Jasper immersed himself in the tasks she assigned. He accompanied her to the stables where a handful of aging horses needed attention, ensuring they were properly fed and groomed. He read the day's mail to her, a mix of bank statements, local charity appeals, and business letters. Though her eyes couldn't catch the print, her mind was razor sharp. She dictated replies with startling swiftness, leaving him just enough time to jot them down. During these interactions, Madeline revealed flickers of her past. She mentioned her late husband, Abel Howell, who'd built one of the region's oldest financial institutions, Hurdle and Finch Bank. Over the years, she'd contributed to its growth in quiet ways, though society never acknowledged a wife's business sense. Since Abel's passing, she'd run the institution from behind the scenes until Damien began pressing her to retire. When he wasn't assisting her, Jasper wandered the estate, marveling at the grand architecture. He found the library a cavernous room lined with antique leather-bound volumes and the music hall that presumably once hosted lavish gatherings. Now dust motes danced in the sunlight, and the echoes of yesteryear lingered like faint whispers. The estate was undeniably majestic, but also lonely in its vastness. Each evening they dined quietly together. Madeline insisted they maintain decorum with the housekeeper serving in formal style. The conversation was polite but minimal. Despite that, Jasper sensed a mutual curiosity forming. She asked about his family, which he described in broad strokes: a father taken by cholera, a mother who tried raising him alone until drought forced them off their ranch. He asked about her education. She spoke of finishing schools in Boston, a stint teaching piano, and eventually following Abel West where opportunity beckoned. On the third evening, with dessert plates set aside, Madeline pressed him gently. Have you reached a decision? Mr. Montgomery, she asked, will you remain as my aide and nothing more, or shall we formalize a union that best serves both our interests? He set down his fork, noticing his pulse pounding. In the quiet hush of the lavish dining room, he said, I've considered it all, ma'am. The idea is odd, but you were honest about your reasons, and I need a place to belong. Her expression softened, though her eyes remained distant. You accept? Jasper nodded. I do. In that unassuming exchange with only a half-eaten slice of pie, and the hush of an aging mansion. As witness, they sealed an agreement that would redefine each of their lives. A hush fell over Howell Estate as the wedding day dawned. The wedding seemed an almost absurd label, given how swiftly and practically the arrangements had formed. By Madeline's direction, they planned a brief civil ceremony before Judge Harrow in the mansion's smaller parlor. Jasper woke to a flicker of anxiety. Shouldn't a marriage involve fanfare, if not romance? But they had agreed on minimal fuss precisely to ward off prying eyes and quell Damien's meddling. The housekeeper. Landis presented him with a second-hand suit that fit well enough after some hurried tailoring. Jasper felt odd in it, unused to starched collars. Yet he recognized the significance of appearing dignified in front of the judge and possibly the household staff. At precisely noon, he stood in the parlor's solemn hush. The walls were adorned with portraits of long-gone Howells, most glaring down in disapproval, or so it seemed to Jasper's nerves. Through the tall windows, winter sun bathed the room in a muted glow. He glanced at Madeline, who was dressed in a tasteful ivory blouse and skirt, her hair pinned back elegantly. Despite her age, she carried herself with regal composure, posture, flawless. Judge Harrow, a short balding man in a rumpled official robe, looked mildly flustered. He read the legal forms, confirmed their identification, and peered at Jasper over the rim of his glasses. "Your union is voluntary, no question." "Yes, sir." Jasper managed his throat dry. Madeline nodded, her expression resolute, then let it be recorded. Judge Harrow droned that Jasper O. Montgomery and Madeline Forbes Howell do hereby enter into the bonds of matrimony for as long as they both shall live. There were no rings exchanged, no embraces, merely signatures in a ledger, along with Ms. Landis and a stable groom, Amos, acting as witnesses. A strangely clinical conclusion to a pact that had begun in hush-hush conversations. "Congratulations," the judge said. His voice subdued, he clearly sensed the unorthodox atmosphere, but the law required no further commentary. Madeline then turned to Jasper. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, "or I suppose we share a surname now. Would you prefer Howell, or do we maintain your name?" The question momentarily stumped him. "I'm content to keep my name, ma'am," he replied. "Unless you prefer otherwise." She shook her head. "No, that's fine. We'll let the attorneys finalize details of how we sign documents." With that, she offered a handshake. Jasper accepted their palms meeting in an awkward yet pivotal gesture. When the judge departed, Miss Landis discreetly retreated, leaving the newlyweds alone in the parlor. Sunlight gleamed on the hardwood floor, revealing motes of dust swirling between them. "It's done," Madeline said, voice calm but with an undercurrent of something that might have been relief. "We've secured the estate from Damien's interference. At least for now," Jasper nodded, feeling the finality of it sink in. "So, we continue as planned." "Yes," she agreed. "But I must remind you, this is still a partnership of necessity. I may carry your name in certain contexts, but our arrangement goes beyond mere formality. There are deeper complexities to address." He swallowed, remembering how the housekeeper had whispered about Miss Howell's other reasons. For the moment, though, he couldn't fathom what more secrets might unfold. The vow was made, the contract sealed. Perhaps that alone would suffice to keep them both afloat until the next storm. Damien Howell arrived at the estate 2 days later, thoroughly uninvited. Despite the winter roads, his sleek sedan pulled up to the mansion's circular driveway in a swirl of slush. Jasper saw him step out, a tall, slim man in his late 40s wearing an impeccable coat and a look of aggravated purpose. If Jasper had expected a pleasantry or polite greeting from Damien, none was forthcoming. "Where is my aunt?" Damien demanded, ignoring Jasper's outstretched hand. "I was informed she'd married some drifter, but I'm hardly prepared to believe it." Bracing himself, Jasper replied, "Mrs. Howell, pardon, Ms. Howell or Madeline, as you prefer. She's in the library. Might be best if we both go in together." Damien's glare suggested that was the last thing he wanted, but Jasper led anyway. He found Madeline seated in a high-backed chair, the library's fireplace, casting long shadows over floor-to-ceiling books. As soon as Damien stepped inside, she set aside the magnifying glass she'd been using for her performance of partial blindness. Jasper sensed the tension in the air triple. "Aunt Madeline," Damien said stiffly, "I heard distressing news about your new circumstances." She inclined her head with regal composure. "Damien, I wasn't aware you'd be visiting so promptly." His gaze swung to Jasper. "This is the man, Jasper Montgomery, the one you claim to have married." Before Jasper could speak, Madeline answered, "Indeed, we wed under Judge Harrow's authority, all legal and above board." If you have concerns, perhaps you can present them courteously. Damien inhaled sharply, reining in his temper. Why would you do this so suddenly? You barely know him. And you're not in a state to make life-altering decisions without consultation. Madeline's expression hardened. I may have impaired eyesight, but my mind remains sound. Do not presume to question my capacity in my own home. Then consider my concern about exploitation. Damien retorted, leveling a scowl at Jasper. Aunt Madeline, you hold substantial assets. The bank properties, stock portfolios. This man arrives from nowhere, presumably penniless, and within days, he's your husband. Jasper felt the sting of those words, but Madeline answered coolly, You exaggerate my finances, dear nephew. The major portion of the bank is overseen by other trustees, and Jasper didn't waltz in, seeking my fortune. He answered a caretaker post, which I happen to need. It is you, Damien, who consistently tries to push me into comfortable living facilities. Damien fumed, turning to Jasper with open hostility. So you're content to exploit a blind widow for your own gain? Jasper's hands clenched involuntarily, but he forced a level tone. I took the job because I needed work, yes. Marriage was Mrs. Howell's idea, one that protects her from being forced into decisions she doesn't want. I stand by that arrangement because it's my duty to help her maintain independence. She deserves that much. The tension in the library crackled like static. For a moment, Damien seemed taken aback by Jasper's directness. Then with a sneer, he said, We'll see if the courts agree guardianship laws exist to protect vulnerable adults. If I have to challenge this sham, I will. Madeline stiffened. You'll do nothing of the sort. I have medical affidavits confirming my competence. I have a prenuptial arrangement with Mr. Montgomery ensuring mutual protections, and I have every right to choose who assists me. Damien's eyes flicked from his aunt to Jasper, a cold calculation in them. I suspect there's more at play than you admit, but so be it. For now, I'll take my leave. But don't assume the matter ends here. With that, he spun and marched out, leaving an ominous hush behind Jasper. Let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of Damien's threat coil in the pit of his stomach. Madeline Howell seemed unshaken, though her hands tightened on the armrests. Don't worry, she said. Damien always pushes, but I push back. We'll be fine. Yet her voice held a note of uncertainty. Though they had the legalities in order, neither could deny that forging a marriage out of necessity opened them to public scrutiny, and worse, to a family determined to discredit them at every turn. 2 weeks after their tense encounter with Damien, life at Howell Estate settled into a curious equilibrium. Jasper managed day-to-day tasks, everything from feeding the few horses left in the stable to organizing Madeline's incoming mail. More than once, he listened in while she handled phone calls with bank associates who recognized her formidable business savvy despite her alleged visual impairment. After each call, she'd exhale, removing her reading glasses with that same precise motion as though it were all part of an intricate dance, yet behind her measured facade, Jasper sensed a quiet strain. Though she played the role of a woman slowly losing her eyesight, she seldom stumbled in private. This contradiction grew more obvious each day. The more closely he observed, the more he realized her visual impairment might be a facade, at least partly. He never saw her grope blindly or misjudge distances. In fact, she navigated the mansion's corridors with an ease that suggested near-perfect familiarity. As suspicions simmered, an unsettling notion crept into Jasper's mind. If Madeline Howell was deceiving the world about being nearly blind, what other truths might she be obscuring? A pang of guilt struck him for doubting the widow who'd shown him kindness, but the question wouldn't leave. He reminded himself that she had every reason to posture in front of Damien, the press, or the business world. Perhaps her condition was real but less severe than rumored, yet something about the level of detail in her disguise nagged at him. One evening, while reading her a letter from a local charity seeking donations, he accidentally omitted a sentence. And that concludes it, he said, folding the paper. Madeline arched an eyebrow. Did you skip the part about their upcoming fundraiser? On the 15th, it should be near the bottom. His stomach lurched. He reopened the letter, scanning to find the exact line referencing the fundraiser. I apologize, Miss Howell. I guess I overlooked it. She offered a tight smile. No matter, just ensure you read thoroughly next time, he stammered through a reassurance, but his mind whirred. How had she known the content? Did she truly see more than she let on, or had she memorized the organization's usual schedule from prior years? Either explanation felt incomplete. Meanwhile, Damien's threats lingered unspoken. They heard no direct news from him, which only fed Jasper's anxiety that the nephew plotted behind the scenes. On a rare trip into town, Sheriff Bourne pulled Jasper aside, warning him that queries were circulating about Jasper's finances, suggesting someone was digging for dirt. That same day, the bank manager, who recognized Jasper as Madeline's new husband, gave him a wary handshake, as if expecting some hidden scandal to erupt. At night, alone in his caretaker's cottage, Jasper found his sleep plagued by restless dreams. The lines between truth and pretense blurred. He'd married Madeline to secure a home and wage sure, but the older woman's motivations grew murkier. And if she was capable of masking her vision so convincingly, what else might she hide? The question gnawed at him like a persistent rat, especially when he caught fleeting glimpses of shadow in her eyes, like sorrow or fear that she kept ruthlessly locked away. Another fortnight passed before the tension snapped. On a frosty dawn, Jasper rode an estate horse to check the far pasture where drifting snow threatened the fence lines. Returning, he found the Howell estate in uproar. Ms. Landis wringing her hands by the front door and Madeline pacing the foyer with anxious energy. Damien Howell had apparently arrived again, this time with a sharp-suited attorney in tow. Inside the drawing room, the stranger introduced as Bryce Tuttle from the law firm, Beaumont and Hardwick wore a solemn expression. Damien stood near him, arms folded, glaring at Jasper. Madeline faced them both, posture rigid as a steel rod, even as her features seemed drawn. "Explain yourself," nephew Madeline demanded. "What is this supposed hearing you've scheduled?" Damien's chin tilted with forced composure. "It's a legal petition, Aunt Madeline, to evaluate whether you're being exploited in your fragile state. If the court sees potential undue influence, it can invoke protective measures." Jasper's blood ran cold. So this was the dreaded guardianship angle. Yet seeing Madeline's face, he realized she was far from shocked. If anything, she looked almost resigned. "Undue influence," she repeated, voice measured. "You propose I am incompetent or manipulated by Mr. Montgomery, who you call a drifter, with no assets." Damien's attorney cleared his throat. "We have documents suggesting that within weeks of his arrival, Mr. Montgomery secured certain financial privileges. We simply question the legitimacy of these privileges." "Which privileges?" Jasper blurted. Perplexed, Madeline motioned him silent with a subtle hand. "I'm aware of no direct financial privileges beyond standard employment compensation. My nephew is manufacturing illusions as usual." Tuttle set a folder on the coffee table. "These statements from Western Bank imply large transfers into an account under Jasper M. Howell. The timing raises questions of who orchestrated it." Jasper shook his head fiercely. "I have no such account, let alone under a combined name. This is a fabrication." The lawyer's lips pressed into a thin line. "If that's the truth, it can be clarified at the hearing. But the burden of proof lies on you, Mr. Montgomery, to demonstrate you haven't taken advantage of Ms. Howell's alleged vulnerability." Damien's eyes gleamed with a triumph he poorly masked. "You see, Aunt Madeline, for all your claims of clear-mindedness, you're opening yourself to a con man's scheming." Madeline's fists clenched at her sides. Jasper noted the slight tremor in her fingers. "Enough, I remain legally recognized as competent. Jasper is my husband, and I willingly gave him the caretaker role. Any false evidence about secret bank accounts will be exposed in court, where I will fight every step." Damien exhaled, a tinge of regret crossing his features. "I don't relish this, Aunt Madeline, but you leave me no choice. The hearing is set in 2 weeks. Prepare your counsel." Within minutes, the men departed, leaving the estate in simmering upheaval. Ms. Landis hovered, eyes wide with worry. Jasper, frustration pulsing in his veins, turned to Madeline. "What are we supposed to do?" "He's forging bank statements. That's beyond unscrupulous." She pressed a hand to her temple. "Let me think, Jasper. Damien is more desperate than I realized. I must contact my attorney." Miss Arkwright immediately. He watched as her usual composure wavered. In the swirl of panic, it struck him again how unblind she appeared, crossing the room, swiftly collecting documents with unerring precision. He couldn't bite back the question any longer. "Madeline, your eyesight, is it truly as bad as you claim, or—" She froze, glancing at him with a mixture of regret and defiance. "Not here," she murmured. "Join me in the study. This conversation is overdue." The study was smaller than the mansion's grand library, but it offered privacy. A heavy door. Thick drapes against the windows. Madeline motioned for Jasper to sit in a leather armchair, while she placed herself behind a sturdy oak desk that had once belonged to Abel Howell. The tension in the air crackled like static before a storm. She began by removing the delicate glasses perched on her nose. You're perceptive, Jasper. Perhaps more than I anticipated, yes. I do see better than I let on. My eyesight is not the primary reason I need a caretaker. His heart thudded. Then, you're not blind. She shook her head. Not in the sense people imagine. I have some visual limitations, mild cataracts, a hint of macular wear, but nothing as debilitating as I've portrayed. He exhaled a shaky breath. Why the ruse, Madeline? Set the glasses on the desk, expression resigned. As you may recall, I told you I needed legal cover for my nephew's meddling. If the world believed I was merely losing vision, they'd still accept me as mentally competent. Damien might fuss, but short of forcibly relocating me, he'd have little ground. However, if my actual diagnosis came to light, he'd likely succeed in stripping me of my autonomy. A grim weight settled on Jasper's chest. What actual diagnosis? For the first time since they met, Madeline Howell looked vulnerable. I've been diagnosed with early onset dementia, specifically Alzheimer's. The progression is slow so far, but it's irreversible. My memory lapses are minor now, like forgetting small tasks or repeating questions. But eventually it will worsen. I invented the blindness story to explain away the occasional confusion or misplacement of items. People blame failing eyesight, not failing memory. Shock washed over Jasper like an icy wave. She had never once hinted at memory issues always appearing sharp as a hawk. But how long have you known? Madeline's voice trembled slightly. About 6 months after Abel's death, I suspected changes in my recall. A doctor in Denver confirmed the worst. Meanwhile, Damien pushed me to retire, move into a facility near him. If he discovered the dementia, he'd argue, I'm unfit to run my affairs. A swirl of conflicting emotions struck Jasper, anger at the deception, sympathy for her plight, and a sense of betrayal at not being told. So you brought me here, letting me believe you needed help for your eyes, when in fact you needed someone to hide your memory decline. That's quite the secret. She braced her hands on the desk. I'm sorry for the subterfuge, truly, but you have to understand, you were desperate, and so was I. A straightforward caretaker arrangement wouldn't protect me from guardianship challenges if my condition were revealed. But a husband, someone with legal priority, could stand in my defense. That's what I needed. He pressed a hand to his temple. Mind spinning. I meant what I said about helping you maintain independence, but dementia is a different beast altogether. It requires specialized care as it progresses. Her gaze fell. I realized that, Jasper. And I have advanced directives, long-term care plans, everything. But I'm determined to stay on my estate for as long as possible, making my own choices. If you wish to walk away, now I can't fault you. Our arrangement is based on half-truths. A quiet hush spread, broken only by the ticking of an ornate grandfather clock. Jasper stared at Madeline, seeing in her lined face and trembling posture, not a manipulator but a woman clutching her autonomy against unstoppable tides. Finally, he said, I need time to process this to decide if I can fulfill a role that's more than caretaker or a stand-in husband. She nodded, her eyes flickering with relief. Take all the time you need. But we have 2 weeks before that hearing, and Damien will use everything in his arsenal. If you choose to stay, I need your unwavering support. Outside, winter's grip showed signs of loosening the sun, lingering a bit longer each day. Yet inside the study, Jasper felt as though he'd stepped onto shifting sands, uncertain if he'd find solid footing again. Jasper spent that evening in restless reflection. Sitting before the modest fireplace in his caretaker's cottage, he stared at the dancing flames, replaying the revelation over and over, Madeline's real condition. Alzheimer's changed the entire nature of their agreement. She hadn't merely been shielding herself from an overbearing nephew. She was racing against a progressive disease. He thought back on every small moment that hinted at memory slips, her momentary confusion over a detail he'd read, or the time she repeated a request as if forgetting she'd already said it. Now those recollections snapped into focus. She was indeed planning every contingency. Why not trust him from the start? Possibly because, in her mind, trusting anyone carried massive risk. The next day, following his morning chores and a solitary lunch, he sought her out in the library. She sat near a tall window backlit by mid-morning sun, the reading glasses perched on her nose. But Jasper now knew it was part performance. Real or not, her thoroughness with estate accounts and finances was undeniable. Madeline seemed wary when she looked up. Have you decided? She asked, words subdued. He inhaled, crossing the room to stand by her desk. I'm staying. he said. Her shoulders relaxed fractionally. But I need certain truths up front. No more half lies about your health. And I want clarity on your plans for care finances in the future. If I'm to defend you at this hearing, I must know everything. Something like gratitude flickered across her features. Agreed. I have extensive documentation. Living wills, advance directives, a trust that designates how the estate transitions if I become incapable. You'll review it all. You deserve that. She pulled a thick binder from a locked drawer, handing it over. Jasper flipped through pages detailing progressive care steps, designated doctors, instructions for potential home health care, even an official statement from a neurologist confirming an early stage of cognitive decline. It struck him how meticulously she'd prepared for her future demise, all the while feigning a lesser ailment to keep her nephew at bay. Damien's hearing claims you're mentally compromised, he murmured, scanning a page. Yet these documents show you're currently within normal bounds of competency. Madeline sighed. Dementia evolves over years, sometimes unpredictably. My mental faculties remain mostly intact, but there are days I forget appointments or misplace critical items. The hearing is a public spectacle, enabling Damien to cast doubt. If the judge sees enough plausible evidence, he could place me under guardianship. My plan is to present an ironclad demonstration of my capacity, plus the fact that I have a husband supporting me, not a random caretaker who can be fired at will. Jasper nodded slowly. I see. So we'll gather statements from your doctor testifying you are capable. I'll confirm that you manage the estate effectively, and we hope it's enough to keep the court from interfering. Yes, she agreed, and I want you to let Mrs. Arkwright, my attorney, handle legal strategy. She'll arrange your testimony. It'll likely be a simple question and answer about our daily life. Just be truthful about how we operate. As they continued discussing, Jasper felt a pang of compassion. Beneath her confident exterior lay fear. Fear of a disease eroding her identity. Fear that a meddling nephew might confine her to a place she hated. By forging a marriage, she'd tried to secure a lifeline. Now it was Jasper's responsibility to uphold it. Leaving the library, he found himself gazing at her reflection in the glass. The lines on her face bore more than age. They bore sorrow and urgency. He hardened his resolve. He'd agreed to this arrangement and come to respect her far beyond any contract. He'd see it through, even if it meant confronting family secrets far uglier than a faked visual impairment. The hearing day arrived under an unseasonably bright sky, sunlight pouring into the county courthouse. Despite the crisp spring mornings, Jasper wore a tangible cloak of apprehension. Beside him, Madeline Howell stood with her spine straight, a light coat draped over her shoulders. Mrs. Arkwright, a formidable attorney in a tailored suit, led them inside. Damien was already there, flanked by Bryce Tuttle and another associate. 2 rows behind him sat a handful of curious onlookers. Local ranchers, a couple of townsfolk, and a journalist from the small newspaper. Whispers floated. She married her caretaker, and he's half her age. Some gasped about the rumored forging of bank statements. Others expressed quiet sympathy for an elderly woman. When the hearing commenced, Judge Mather, a woman in her 60s with rimless glasses, called for order. Damien's lawyer began by alleging Madeline's questionable mental state, referencing supposed memory lapses and conflicting statements about her finances. Jasper's frustration simmered, but Miss Arkwright calmly dismantled each claim, presenting letters from doctors verifying Madeline's current competence. Next came the matter of the alleged bank accounts under Jasper. M. Howell Tuttle produced grainy documents, hinting at large cash deposits. Arkwright pointed out glaring inconsistencies. The signature didn't match Jasper's, and official timestamps contradicted his known whereabouts. The judge's brow furrowed in suspicion toward Tuttle's evidence. Jasper was called to testify. He stepped forward, heart pounding. Tuttle tried to paint him as an opportunist. Isn't it true you arrived in town penniless, with no stable job? Yes, Jasper conceded. I had no illusions about my poverty, but that's precisely why I took honest work. Howell offered me caretaker duties first. Marriage came later at her request to ensure no one forced her to leave her estate. And you happily married a wealthy widow for security, correct? Jasper felt Madeline's gaze on him. I married her to provide stability for both of us. She's given me shelter and wages. Yes, but I handle her estate tasks diligently. She's not incompetent. She's strong-willed and, in my experience, fully capable of making her own decisions. Tuttle snorted. So you're simply a devoted helper. No hidden motives. None, Jasper said firmly. She's built her life here. I'm honoring that by helping her stay. Judge Mather interjected, turning to Madeline. Mrs. Howell, kindly explain your reasoning for this marriage. Madeline rose with measured grace, speaking in that refined tone. Your Honor, I lost my husband some years ago. My nephew, though well-intentioned, insists I enter a facility I neither want nor require at this stage. Mr. Montgomery is a skilled caretaker, which I do need. But more importantly, he respects my independence. Our marriage ensures no one can overrule my personal decisions. The prenuptial agreement clarifies finances, so he cannot exploit me. I am not incompetent, nor is my vision the barrier. Damien claims. A ripple of surprise spread. She just admitted that her eyesight, while diminished, was not as extreme as people believed. Mrs. Arkwright guided her to produce letters from neurologists affirming she was presently capable of self-governance. The judge took a long moment to review. Then her measured voice echoed in the hushed room. Damien Howell, your petition suggests your aunt is mentally compromised, but the expert testimony says otherwise. Unless you have further substantial proof, I see no grounds for removing her autonomy. As for the alleged forged accounts, the evidence is suspect. A flush colored Damien's cheeks. Tuttle stammered, but Your Honor, we still harbor concerns. Judge Mather raised a hand, quelling the interruption. It's not illegal for an older adult to marry a younger spouse, nor is it proof of undue influence when all records show Ms. Howell remains cognizant. Petition denied. A bang of the gavel sealed the decision. Tuttle's face fell and Damien's shoulders slumped. Madeline exhaled quietly, a relief mingling with the tension that had kept her upright. Jasper, standing beside her, felt his own wave of triumph and a strange surge of protectiveness. Outside, the sun was glorious, bright enough to make Madeline squint. She turned to Jasper, reaching out to grip his arm lightly. Thank you, she murmured. For standing by me, he covered her hand with his. We're in this together. Though the hearing ended, they both knew their journey was far from over. Madeline's condition would progress, and Damien might not surrender easily. But for the moment, the improbable marriage between a starving cowhand and a 72-year-old bank owner's widow had weathered its first real test. In that shared victory, they discovered something deeper than a pragmatic bargain, a bond forged in adversity and shaped by a mutual vow to protect what truly mattered. Dignity, autonomy, and the promise of a home they could both call their own. In the end, what started as a starkly practical deal, job security for him, independence for her, blossomed into something that surprised them both. Their alliance confronted doubt, family disputes, and hidden truths, yet it proved unshakable. The fragile trust they built grew into genuine respect and eventually a bond where both found hope in uncharted territory. She gained a partner willing to face her health challenges head-on, and he found not just a roof over his head, but a place that finally felt like home. Personally, I see their journey as proof that human connections can spring from the unlikeliest arrangements. What are your thoughts on how they overcame every obstacle? Share your comments below and let's keep the discussion going. If this story inspired you, subscribe to our channel to follow many more heartfelt narratives of endurance and unexpected partnerships.